All right. Hi, everybody. I'm EG. I work on Infura at Consensus, and today we want to talk to you a bit about GraphQL APIs for Ethereum. So, uh, Infura runs nodes and an Ethereum API as a service for developers to quickly get people started building applications. And we've been around since about 2016. We were one of the first teams working at Consensus trying to build tools to help bootstrap the developer ecosystem. And so we really want to make sure that developers are getting the right experience, right? We want to make sure that the tools that they have are the best to build applications, and we really felt like focusing on the infrastructure so that developers can focus on whatever new protocol they're trying to create was valuable. So talking a little bit about the evolution of Ethereum tooling, we started out with one Ethereum client, and now we have a choice. We started with the C++ client, then we had Geth and Parity. Now there's Pantheon, Ethereum. There's options now. We also started with just EVM assembly, and then we went from that to an improvement, which was Solidity, and then now we're looking at Serpent, and then we went to Solidity and Viper and these other next generation languages and smart contract languages for development. We started with no frameworks, and then we went and had Truffle, and then there are many other versions that people can use now. There's Embark, there's Parasol, and then when we talk about the JSON RPC, this is how people are building the front end for these applications, and we haven't really iterated on it. If you look at the JSON RPC right now versus the JSON RPC we had a year, 2 years, and 3 years ago, it's the same pretty much, with only a couple of additional methods. And that's what we want to talk about is we need to continue to improve on the tooling, and let's start by taking a close look at what this query layer is for Ethereum data. And if you've been looking at, outside of the crypto space in what is really interesting for people building applications, GraphQL has been a pretty popular API standard the last couple of years and is continuing to grow in terms of adoption. So let's look at trying to build a GraphQL API for Ethereum. And that standard that we've been developing over the last year in partnership with folks from the Pegasus team, which works on the Pantheon client, and other people in the ecosystem, have been calling this effort EthQL, the Ethereum standard for a GraphQL API. So when we try to pull data off of the blockchain, it's difficult. It's when you think about when you're building an application right now, you're querying raw information. You're saying, give me this block of information, and then from that, I'm pulling transaction information. And then from those transactions, I'm pulling events from a smart contract. And that's a pretty low-level way of trying to build an application. It'd be great if you can deal with it in more friendly terms, like I want to get all balances back for ERC20 tokens for this address, or I want to get all birthing events for crypto kitties within this time range, right? And if you want to build that type of functionality right now, you don't really have that abstraction layer. And having a better API, such as a GraphQL powered API, can start to get you towards a better developer experience, which will help you build a more efficient application. So that's what we're going to talk about, is let's get towards this next generation API. So this is Kris Shinn, also from our team, who's been taking over a lot of the work of leading our EthQL development effort, and he's going to walk you through the rest of the workshop. Thanks.
Thanks, EG. So walking towards the next gen API, as EG was saying, we base it on GraphQL, right? So for those of you that aren't as familiar with GraphQL, it's what we're calling a schemaful data selection API. And it basically views all data that you're querying as a graph. It's about the data entities and the relationship between those entities encoded as a query language. It's been in use inside Facebook since 2012, open sourced in 2015, and it had an MIT license, applied in 2017. What's nice about this is it flips the model, right? With every API implementation, it's the server that dictates what you're getting. The server says, this is the data that's available, and it gives you all of the data back. Well, with GraphQL, it gives it now in the client's control. or the application control, right? So the application says, I'm only interested in such and such a data. I only want these 3 pieces of data back, and the server will only transfer back those pieces of data. So it's a single self-describing endpoint, unlike REST where you have to navigate through a series of resources. It also contains a self-description that REST you have to layer on, Swagger or JSON RPC or another layer to give it that schema structure. It's the ocean. But with GraphQL, it's built right in, right? So you can build a lot of tools on top of it because you can query what is available for you to query. And it solves a lot of challenges that you find with REST, having to navigate different resources, relationships between resources, Helios, versioning, deprecating APIs, paging, extensibility, like all of these things are built within the GraphQL specification. So it provides a really nice developer experience, both in designing the API and in consuming the API. And by the way, it provides query validation out of the box. So if you're building a server from it, you don't have to worry about checking all of the arguments. The specification itself, since it's strongly typed, will take care of all of that validation for you. Now, a little bit of what we mean by schemaful. It basically means that all of the data relationships are encapsulated within the data types themselves. So if you see on the right-hand side, we have a log type, right? An Ethereum log. And within that, you have an account reference and a transaction reference. Coming back from the API itself, it's usually just a hash or a reference. In GraphQL, we actually unroll those for you, so you can just select that nested inside your query. And I'll show you what I mean in a few minutes. So presenting what we're calling EthQL, right? GraphQL plus Ethereum is EthQL. What do we want to use EthQL? It presents Ethereum data as a navigable graph. It integrates with powerful front-end libraries like Apollo clients, so you get a lot of sort of batteries included functionality that you can just pull into your applications. More importantly, it fetches only the data you need, no less or no more, right? The problem with JSON RPC and REST is that it suffers from data overfetching or underfetching. You're either fetching way too much data that you're only going to use a portion of, or you have to make multiple calls in order to get the data that you need. EthQL kind of solves all of that. This means it reduces round trips to your server. It gives you less data you have to parse and decode, which means it's improving your user experience. It's decreasing the time you have to wait for the network to return the data. And it provides a better user experience for your users. And it supports a modern ecosystem that's built on top of this. So like I said, you get a lot of batteries included and a lot of open source libraries that you could just plug into your application and get going. Essentially, it eliminates the need for JSON RPC and a lot of the multiple calls that you need in order to resolve your data. I just wanted to touch upon this right now. This is a very rapidly developing space for us. So there's two sort of flavors that we have. There's the standard flavor and an extended flavor. The standard version of EthQL is what we're working through to get ratified as an EIP. We're trying to get this standardized and implemented directly in the nodes. And there's initial implementation in Geth, and I believe it's going to be out in the next point release. And the standard version supports mutations like sending raw transactions. The extended version, which is what I'm going to demonstrate today, is an overlay on top of the EthQL standard, and it supports a lot more convenience functions, things like log decoding, a plugin system for extending it with your own contracts, a flexible deployment model. There's a lot of convenience features that we've built into the extended version. So the kind of features that we support that I started to go into, block selection on a single block, multiple blocks, lists of blocks, navigating through a block into a transaction, into accounts. We have transaction filters, so you can say, only show me transactions that have input or that have logs. Has ERC20 support, so you can start to decode and unroll ERC20 events. Drill into storage, and it has a JSON RPC transport selection. So until we get the standard ratified across all of the nodes, we basically do smart batching on top of the JSON RPC, so it's faster, less round trips, and it compiles all of this data for you. So getting started is pretty easy. If you're running your own node, like if you're developing against Truffle, or you have a light client on your local, you can just clone the repo, cd into the repo, yarn dev, and supply your own endpoint that you want to query against. If you have an Infura account or you want to sign up for Infura, it's just as easy. Clone the repo, cd into the directory, specify your Infura ID, and start the server. The easiest is that we set up a playground for you guys to experiment with. So you could just point your clients directly to this URL here and start playing with it and get going right away. So this is kind of an interesting slide with the efficiency gains that we've seen in our testing. In this setup, we queried 5 blocks, and we're fetching various data from the blocks, right? The hash, transactions, the sending address, and the value of the transaction. Over JSON RPC, the sum of the entire data set to get this information was a little bit over a meg, and almost 2,000 requests to the client to compile all of this information. With EthQL, the bytes over the wire was a little over 200K. 81% reduction in the data across the wire, and we did it in 1 call. All right, demo time. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how to play with EthQL. I'm going to be doing this live typing, so stick with me if I crash and burn. All right, so this is the EthQL playground. If you go to the URL that was in the previous slide, this is what you're going to land on. And then we can just start writing queries, right? So let's say we want to select the latest block. And I just want to see what the number is, the latest block number. Okay, great. Short and sweet. For the rest of this demo, I'm just going to peg it to this particular block number. Great, nothing changed. Let's see, I want to select the transactions. Index and a hash. So there I just queried for all of the transactions in this block, included the indexes and the hashes just for brevity. As you can see, all of them come back, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All the transactions are there. But say I only want the ones that have logs. And it filters out all of the ones that don't have logs, right? So now I'm just seeing index 1, index 5, 6, 7, 12, all of the transactions that have logs. So now for something a little bit more functional, let's say for each of these transactions I want to scan for ERC20 tokens. Transfer, token contract, symbol, value. And just like that, we see all of the transactions that happened in this block, and it shows the symbol and the value traded. This is a very short selection of the data that's available. I can also query on accounts so I can see who it was sent to, who it was sent from. But the point is that trying to do this over JSON RPC would be much more difficult, right? You'd have to loop over a number of transactions, and then you'd have to go and decode all of the logs. So with EthQL, this is basically all at your fingertips. Back to present. All right, so the roadmap. This is a very active project for us. So we plan to add a lot of functionality to this. We support standards. We love standards, and we want to support a lot of standards in the ecosystem. ERC 721, ERC 165, ENS. Those are all functionalities that we want to add to decode. This is built on a modular plugin system, right? So it can include your contracts. It can include whatever flavor that you want to support. We have flexible deployment models, which I'm not going to go into right now, but basically you can deploy EthQL in any number of ways. We want to support GraphQL subscriptions, so it'll eliminate the need for polling. We want to support the schema variants, so various paging methods, a simpler paging, and then the relay-based schema paging. We want to integrate with indexing backends, two-level cache, and new filtering strategies. And so this is basically driven by you guys. Like, what do you want to see? How do you want to filter your data? Those are the strategies that we want to place inside EthQL. So EthQL is made for you, the dApp developers. So use it, break it, contribute to us, let us know what you want, let us know what's missing. We're on Getter. This is the URL to the open source project for EthQL. Say hi with a star, open issues, contribute. And then for more information, we set up some documentation for this hackathon. There's the playground URL that I was just showing you, and then finally the repo. So Infura is sponsoring some prizes. So there's $3,000 in prizes for the projects that use EthQL. So build with it and let us know. Thank you so much. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, maybe about 5 minutes. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, so I was describing the two flavors, right? Standard and extended. The standard implementation that's being built into Geth and that we're trying to get implemented into nodes will support mutations. Right now, it's limited to send raw transaction, but as we get further along and start developing on this, you tell us what you need, and that's stuff that we would like to bake into this API. The mutations? It is something that you can use today. It's not quite released in a point version of Geth yet. The next point version will support it. The one that we have set up is the extended. I'm sorry?
Build master.
Oh, yes, you could build master on the Go Ethereum repo and play with it if you wanted to do that. Yes, sir. That is correct. That's one of the deployment models. So if you clone the repo, you can basically point it at Infura if you're running Infura just with the ID, or you can specify your own URL, like if you're running your own node, or if you're developing local with Truffle or something like that. Great. Thank you so much.